Hi everybody, it's Courtney. Today we're going to be making 3 pretty quick and simple cards using the Winter Memory stamp set by Newton's Nook. So I'm starting off with a piece of Nina Solar Weight 80-pound cardstock. This is cut down to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I'm pretty much doing these the same way with just different masking and different colors of Distress Oxidings. So for this particular one, I'm just using some Post-it note tape here to mask off the top and the bottom. This is going to be a landscape card. And I'm also taking a piece of Eclipse masking paper, and I'm just going to kind of freehand some curves, and this will be the snow on the bottom of my little scene here. And we're going to be doing the snow a little bit different than we've been doing in the last few videos that we've done this. We're going to be actually shading from the bottom up. So I'm going to lay out my first 2 little snowbanks here, and then I'll lay one right on top of those masks in the middle of them, I guess. And I'm just making sure here that they're curved instead of having some jagged lines, being I did this freehand. So you'll just want to make sure that they aren't too jagged, because that will show once you do your ink blending. So for this one, my sky, I'm going to make a night scene here. So I am going to be using Salty Ocean, Black Soot, Faded Jeans, and Chipped Sapphire. Starting off with my lightest color on the bottom and kind of working my way up to the Faded Jeans, then the Chipped Sapphire, then the Black Soot on the top. And once I get to the top, I'll work my way back down. Sometimes I'm going to be re-inking my ink blending tool. Other times I'm just going to kind of use whatever is on there just to help those colors blend a little bit. These are all blues with the exception of the Black Soot, so they do blend very nicely together. But just keep in mind that the Distress Oxides stay wet a little bit longer than regular Distress inks. They kind of lay on top of the paper, so you have more time to blend with or without more ink on that tool. So once I was happy with my sky here, I'm just going to take my Mister bottle here and just use the nozzle to sprinkle on some clean water and dab that up with a paper towel. I didn't use any shimmer here because I knew I'm going to be stamping on top of it, and sometimes the shimmer will kind of resist that ink. So for the snowbanks, I'm going to switch over to some Stormy Sky, and I'm removing one mask at a time. And I'm just very lightly, with a very light hand, going from the bottom of my little snowbank up. And then I'll remove the next mask and do the same thing, only removing one mask at a time. And finally going to that third one. And this will create some shadows where one little snowbank or snow hill is laying on top of the other. Then I'm going to go ahead and put this panel aside to dry for a little bit before we do our stamping. And we'll move on to the next panel. Again, doing these pretty much the same way, just kind of switching up where I'm masking it on the card panel itself. And of course, the colors of the Distress Oxides. For this particular one, I'm only using 3 colors of Distress Oxides and not even bothering with the snow on the bottom. The third one, I'll do the snow the same way, but just switch up the colors and switch up the masking. So I've been thinking about doing a YouTube live, and just wanted to kind of get your opinion on whether or not this would be worth doing. I'm not really 100% sure how to do it yet, so I haven't really looked into too much, but I figured that would be a good way for everybody to kind of interact rather than just leaving comments and waiting a day or two for a response. It would probably just be a little bit easier for us to kind of interact live. If this is something that you guys may be interested in, leave a comment below whether or not you'd be interested in it and what days and what times would work for you. I'm sure evenings would probably work for most people. I know that we're all in different time zones, so we'll kind of have to figure that out. I'll try to pick a time that kind of works best for everybody so that anybody who is interested in watching live will be able to, and I'll be able to do that at a good time. So back to these cards, we totally skipped over the second one. But for this one, I'm masking off the top and bottom again. However, this one will be a portrait card. And I'm going to do a night scene again, but with different colors. And I'm doing the same thing as far as the snow goes, just making sure that none of these edges are too jagged. The top snowbank I made a little bit less curved, I guess, if that makes any sense, because I had planned on using one stamp from the stamp set and ended up changing my mind anyway, so that part didn't even matter. So again, starting off with the abandoned coral, which will go on the bottom. Then I'll work up with my wilted violet and then the faded jeans. And these I had to go over a couple of more times than the other two panels just because these colors are so far off from one another. They're not, you know, all blues or all greens. So I did go back and forth. I worked my way up, then worked my way back down, and then worked my way back up again. Usually once I have enough ink on there, I don't necessarily have to re-ink my ink blending tool. I have enough on there, plus I'm just kind of moving around the ink that's already on the paper. Once everything was kind of blended, I took the ink blending tool from the faded jeans and kind of went over the entire thing because I do want this to have more blue than anything else, being it is a night sky. Sprinkled on that clean water, dab that up with a paper towel, and then I'm going to do the same thing as I did with that first card with my little snowbanks here. However, I put so much ink on my panel here that it was still wet. So when I went in with my ink blending tool here, I picked up a little bit of that abandoned coral. So I don't know whether you guys can see it on camera, but it's not completely blue. It's got a little bit of a pinkish purplish tint to it, but I'm okay with that. Once everything is said and done, you're not even going to be able to tell. Now this mask kept coming up, so I just kind of worked in the direction of the mask to kind of prevent too much of my ink bleeding where I didn't want it to go. Again, once that's done, I put that panel aside to dry and we'll move on to the stamping. You will want to save these masks just in case you'll need them for your stamping. So I left mine aside just in case I needed to grab those. So back to this first panel, I'm going to use my Misty here for my stamping just in case I need to restamp. These are solid images, they're silhouette images. So I wanted to make sure that I was able to stamp again if I needed to. So for this one, I'm just going to be using the trees, and I'm lining up my trees here on the side, but I don't want the trunk of the tree to be on my snow. I want it to be behind my snow. So I'm going to take that same mask that we used, line that back up, and then I'll go ahead and stamp my images with VersaFine Onyx Black ink. This gives a really crisp image, but you have to remember that this is also a pigment ink. So you want to clean your stamp right away. But also we're stamping on Distress Oxides, which are probably still wet. I probably only waited about 10 minutes for these panels to dry. And then we're stamping on top of that with a pigment ink. So just keep in mind that more than likely this ink is going to take a little bit more time than usual to dry. So before you adhere it to a card base or before you do anything to it, you'll just want to make sure that that VersaFine is dry. You can kind of tell by tilting your card panel around. If it's not shiny anymore, then it's dry. If you see any shine to it at all, there are going to be some wet spots and you may smear it. So once I had my trees down, I went ahead and aligned the sentiment from that same stamp set right onto my card panel, and I stamped all my sentiments in the ink blended areas as well. And again, used my Misty for this. I didn't end up needing to restamp anything more than once. I got a good impression for all three cards for all of the images, but I used my Misty just in case. So once the first card was done, we'll move on to the second card. I left my mask there on the bottom. I wanted to use the little ice, I guess, or pond, this frozen pond, and realized that it was a little bit bigger than that rectangle that we had. So I brought out my masks again and masked off either side, stamped that little frozen pond there on the bottom, and then once that was done, I'll stamp my little ice skaters right on top. You can stamp directly over it even though it's dry. That won't necessarily smear. You just don't want to touch it with your fingers or anything like that. Now with the VersaFine also, this is my favorite ink to use for sentiments or anything that I want a bold black image with, but it does stick to your stamps. It dries on your stamps quicker than it dries on paper, it seems. So you don't want to wait too long before you clean your stamps, or else you're going to have a little bit of a hard time getting those clean. So once I had my images stamped, I again went ahead and aligned my sentiment and stamped that with that same ink, removed my masks, and then put this panel aside to dry a little bit before adhering this to my card base. So finally, we'll move on to the third card, and again, using my Misty, and this time I'm going to use this little boy, I think, pulling the sleigh. So I want this to make it look as if they were on one of those snow hills. I also aligned the trees as well, and then realized that I probably am going to have to stamp one at a time, being one's on one hill, one's on the other. So I lined up my masks again that we had used in the beginning, stamped two of those images down, and then I didn't bother to mask the top hill before stamping my other tree, just because my ink was still wet and I'm just impatient and didn't want to wait for it to dry. So I did go ahead and align my tree up and then just stamp that directly over that little hill, not worrying about the tree trunk being on top of it. Then I will align my sentiment as well as some of the little snowflakes. There's a few little snowflakes within the stamp set, so I kind of just scattered those around my little scene and stamped those down as well. And once all of my card panels were dry, we'll move on to assembling the cards. So for the first one, I ended up taking just a little bit off the top and the bottom, and I didn't measure this. I just eyeballed it like I normally do. And then I took my Tombow Mono Multi Glue and adhered this flat to a black A2 size card base. And I didn't add any embellishments to these. I just kept them as is. And for my second card, I'm going to trim all four sides on this one. Again, not measuring at all, just trying to take about the same amount off on all four sides. And then I'll adhere this with my same Tombow Mono Multi Glue to kind of a mint color card base. I did have a few smudges on this panel and the third one as well, and I think they came from my magnet from my Misty, but I just took my sand eraser, and when you use this, you just want to go very, very lightly. You'll probably have to go over the same area more than once, but if you press too hard, you're going to tear your paper and it's going to be noticeable. So just go with a very light hand and just keep going over the same area as many times as needed. Now for this third and final card here, I didn't do anything. I fixed up my smudges and then just adhered this flat to a white A2 size note card with no border at all. So these are the three cards for today, guys. Thanks a lot for stopping by. Remember to leave a comment below about YouTube Live if that's something that you guys are interested in, and have a great day. Bye.